I'm talking to Rob Copeland, who is the chair of the Higher Education and Research Standing Committee of ETUCE. We're coming up to this ministerial meeting about the Bologna process. As the Hearst chair, you've been very involved, but you've been specifically working to represent us in the preparation of a paper about academic freedom. Now, I thought academic freedom was a key value of Bologna from the beginning. So what's in this paper? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's right. It's part of a general package of issues that have increasingly been of concern to the higher education sector, and that's around sort of fundamental values. And I think academic freedom in particular is one of those which has been in recent years under threat or under challenge, as we say, particularly. I think as the rise of sort of political nationalism and authoritarianism in certain parts of our region, where academics and universities have been targeted by regimes because they are seen as voices of dissent or critique of government. So I think that has accelerated in recent times, most obviously in Turkey. So that's the kind of initial prompt. But for us in ETUCE, we also think that it's been more subtly undermined or under threat or as a result of other forces that are perhaps less well known and are more widespread across the whole of Europe.
So this paper will sit alongside the Ministerial Communique that's coming out in June from the meeting. How have you been involved representing ETUCE in working on that?
Well, as you said, there's a separate task force looking specifically at this issue of fundamental values, and we focused on academic freedom. And the purpose of the kind of annex paper is really to put some flesh on the bones in relation to the communique. The communique, we hope, will have some sort of common understanding of what academic freedom means in a very sort of basic sense. But the paper to accompany it, as I said, gives it more detail about what that definition is. So gives it a kind of greater understanding. So for people to kind of have a kind of greater understanding of what it means, but also it lays down the importance of being able to monitor and measure academic freedom. And that has always been the big gap with the Bologna process. We've had the word academic freedom for many years in various communiques, but there's been no mechanism or yardstick to assess to what extent it's actually being valued or adhered to by member states. And so this document offers a way forward in terms of being able to sort of monitor it and measure it, as well as just warm words from the ministers in the communique.
Okay, so it will make it a bit more concrete, hopefully, what this kind of commitment to this fundamental value of academic freedom
going forward,
is.
Hopefully, for the next 3 years, but also beyond that as well, because it's a kind of a long-term process in terms of embedding it within the working practices of the Bologna process.
Yeah. Why is the Bologna process, as both a forum but then a real practice in the sector? Why is the Bologna process a relevant kind of level, a relevant space in which to talk about academic freedom? Because the most emblematic parts of Bologna that are well known, obviously, it's student-teacher mobility, recognition of qualification, things like that. Why are we talking about academic freedom as part of that process?
Because I think the issue of kind of the values of higher education, what defines higher education in Europe as a kind of quality system, both for teaching and research. You cannot just look at it in process issues. It can't just be a kind of more technical exercise that is important issues around quality assurance agencies and recognition of qualifications, but it also needs to have some sort of kind of values-based system, and I think that's why why we see it as an important part of this process, because it can't just be a process, as I say, a technical kind of exercise. And I think part of its problem is it hasn't really engaged at that level in terms of certainly the staff and students. It needs to kind of have that kind of more kind of meaningful qualitative element, which are based around values.
Now, thinking about how meaningful this is for the academics and researchers, higher education workers that we represent all across Europe, What will this document mean for them in their daily work, and will they and their unions be able to use it at national level?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, I think what the document will do is, first of all, it links it to international instruments of definitions of academic freedom. It sets up its own common understanding for Europe, but it kind of embeds it in the sort of best practice of existing international instruments. So I think it kind of raises awareness of that. It's an opportunity to use with ministers who, if they sign up to it, to say, look, you basically, your higher education minister agreed to this. We need to have some sort of mechanism how it's translated into kind of national jurisdiction. So it can't just be empty words. So I think it's something you can use in kind of your lobbying with ministers, or even with vice chancellors and rectors at the institutional level, to say, this is of importance, particularly if you are kind of badging Bologna as something that's, an important part of your university.
Then say, look, actually, you've committed to this.
Exactly. And for ministerial, it shouldn't just be a nice conference in Rome or Paris. There's actually some sort of follow-up mechanism. And I think by embedding it within a sort of monitoring or implementation process, there will be mechanisms to do that. So it's not just every 2 years the ministers meet.
Yeah. So there will be monitoring of some kind.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is where this work came out of. It was the group called the monitoring body, the monitoring working group, and they realised there was a deficiency in terms of how do you monitor academic freedom, staff-student participation, and so on. And if you just rely on governments to self-report, it's a highly politically contentious area, and governments are much less likely to admit, okay, yeah, hold hands up, we're deficient in terms of the protection of academic freedom. They may be more willing to do it on some technical issues, but on that area. So that's why this body of work is going to hopefully lead to some kind of proper data sets, independent kind of data sets that can verify to what extent governments within the EHEA are abiding by some kind of core principles like academic freedom. So as happens in other parts of the Bologna work that you mentioned around quality assurance agencies. So it's trying to put it on a more equal footing.
Okay,
the values agenda
as a pillar of
as
the
well
process.
As the process.
Yeah.
But this is very much the first step in terms of moving that forward, firstly with a common understanding, and then an agreement to sort of look at what kind of data, what kind of monitoring or data there is out there to do that.
And obviously that's been put together with various stakeholders, there's government, other kind of voices in the debate there, but you have personally been very involved in helping to draft that document. From a trade union point of view, from the point of view of the professionals who work in higher education, how will we see that fingerprint on the document? What does academic freedom look like to the professionals that work in the sector and their trade unions?
I think that's a good point. I think one thing we've tried to do in the document, and I think we had support from all the other stakeholders, is that academic freedom, which is for us is the freedom to teach, to research, and to sort of speak out in the public domain without kind of fear of reprisal or your career to be have a detrimental consequence. But underpinning that are some fundamental kind of structures or cultures or processes, one of which is the need for some security of employment. It's very hard to exercise those rights if you are on a fixed term contract. You're much less likely to speak out. And there is a reference to that within the text. And secondly, a key underpinning or supportive element is the collegial governance that exists in universities, that staff and students are able to participate meaningfully in decision making. And that is an important kind of bulwark or protection for academic freedom. Because if you have a governance structure which is dominated by senior managers or increasingly external stakeholders, usually business, they are, I suspect, much less likely to kind of adhere to those, recognise the fundamental importance of academic freedom. So those two elements are in there, and I think they are amongst our members and the students. I think they will recognise the value of those in protecting and promoting academic freedom.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it shows that there's a very clear link, isn't there, between academic freedom as an abstract value and the reality of working conditions in the sector.
And that's really one of the points that we keep hammering on about. And it's not just us. I mean, the best international instrument, in my view, in terms of the definition of academic freedom is the 1997 UNESCO statement. And that makes it clear, even more clearly, I'd say, than the text here, that job security or tenure or particular is an absolute safeguard for academic freedom. And we want to remind ministers in the EHEA that it's not just solely about political interference or repression, academic freedom. There is a link to employment conditions and unfortunately worsening employment conditions across many EHEA countries. So we want to keep
that being the European higher education area, I believe. That is a really good point. Of course, it's not just about a few of those really famous cases of outright oppression. Actually, you can see this undermining in many countries across the European region.
And we don't want ministers to be complacent that somehow this is just an issue for the Turkeys of this world, governments in Turkey, or it's just a problem within the EU in Hungary. They are important issues we need to shine a spotlight on, and we continue to do so. But we also want to see some focus on the more subtle pressures and threats that undermine academic freedom on the ground.
Okay, thanks very much for covering all of that. One final question, not just about the annex to the communique about academic freedom, but about the communique in general. So this is going to set the future of the Bologna process for the next few years. What's your one big hope? What do you really want to see in that document that emerges in June?
I suppose the underlying theme, it's reflected in the various sections, but also is probably the importance of the staff as a key stakeholder within the system. Staff and students, obviously, but I think sometimes it's the voice of staff is kind of conflated with that of the institution, but actually there's a kind of key role for staff in relation to many aspects of the Bologna process. On teaching and learning, for example, we hope that there is something there that, if you want quality student learning conditions, you need quality working conditions for staff. Again, on fundamental values, there's something there about academic freedom which reflects the importance of staff as a key, in many ways often the key stakeholder in relation to the success or otherwise of the Bologna process, which ultimately we assume is around enhancing the quality of higher education across the European higher education area. So that would be my one cross-cutting theme I'd like to see in
it's a good wish. It's a big wish. It's a good wish. We'll see what comes out of that in June. Rob, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.